Now, to our Chinese interlocutors, I shall address you collectively. And thank you for the propaganda spills disguised as questions.
Recently, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Russian-Ukraine war is a proxy war between nuclear powers and needs to be ended. And meanwhile, the United States is selling more arms to this region and setting up more military bases in the Philippines. So, if the proxy war in Europe needs to be ended, are you concerned that a proxy war in Asia might be launched?
China has hit back at comments by the Philippine Defense Secretary, stressing that Beijing has a full historical and legal basis to uphold territorial sovereignty in the South China Sea. The Chinese embassy in Singapore reiterated that Beijing has been exercising a high degree of restraint in the disputed waterway. The reaction came as tensions played out during the final day of the Shangri-La dialogue.
The rivalry between China and the US has been in key focus at the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore. But speaking at a plenary session on the third and final day of the Security Summit, Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro said while the China-US strategic competition increasingly defines the regional and global security environment, it should not be overemphasized. Manila has accused Beijing of aggressive behavior in the disputed South China Sea and building artificial islands in the disputed waters. China, on the other hand, has been angered by joint military drills between the US and the Philippines, as well as the deployment of American military systems in the country.
Recently, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the Russian-Ukraine war is a proxy war between nuclear powers and needs to be ended. And meanwhile, the United States is selling more arms to this region and setting up more military bases in the Philippines. So, if the proxy war in Europe needs to be ended, are you concerned that a proxy war in Asia might be launched? Thank you.
Actually, I really appreciate the viewpoint made by Deputy Prime Minister from Thailand. He said we should push forward cooperation and unity, not the division. So it is inappropriate for the minister from Lithuania to attach a label on China, and it's clear a rhetoric for division here in Asia. And my question is for the Philippine Secretary of Defense. As we know, both Vietnam and Malaysia have differences with China in South China Sea. Yet, both countries have effectively managed these differences with China. So my question is, why can't the Philippines do the same? And yesterday, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar mentioned he advised your president to engage dialogue and communication with China. So will the Philippines follow his advice and change its current approach to the South China Sea issue? Or does the Philippines intend to act as a proxy for external powers, continue to serve as a shadow in the shadow play, as described by Singapore former Defense Minister An Yong-hen at this year's Munich Security Conference? Thank you.
Now, to our Chinese interlocutors, I shall address you collectively. And thank you for the propaganda spills disguised as questions. First, the comparison between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Let us not forget that while we are members of ASEAN, we are sovereign countries, each with its own territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I am sure that if what China is doing to the Philippines is done to Malaysia or to any ASEAN country, you would see a different reaction. And certainly as an ASEAN brother, the Philippines will stand up with that ASEAN brother in time of need, in support and in defense of what is international law and UNCLOS. As members of UNCLOS, we are all committed to support it. On the dialogue with China, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, the fact that the question was asked in the way it does, it engenders a deficit of trust in China's words vis-a-vis its actions. I just look back to 1995 on a place called Mischief Reef. There were a few bamboo structures erected there, and China said that these were temporary havens for fisherfolk. Now you have an artificial military island, heavily militarized. China says that it has peaceful intentions. Why does it continue to deny the Philippines its rightful provenance under international law and UNCLOS? And as proof of this, we do not stand alone. No country in the world supports the 9-dash line claim of China, or the idea that waters within this 9-dash line are internal waters of China. Several countries in the world, no less than 50, have joined the Philippines in condemning China's behavior in the South China Sea. None have agreed with China, and none has condemned the Philippines for standing up against China in the face of a threat to its territorial integrity and sovereignty, for which I thank the members in this chamber right now for your support. And thus, for dialogue to be effective, it must be coupled with trust. And China has a lot of trust building to do to be an effective negotiating partner in dispute settlement. We have to call a spade a spade. And that's what we see, and that is the biggest stumbling block to dispute resolution or dialogue with China. That deficit of trust, which I think any rational person or any person that is not ideologically biased with freedom of thought and freedom of speech will agree with me. And lastly, external policy sometimes is a mirror of internal conditions, and vice versa. I, for one, cannot trust a country which imposes, represses its own people. I hope I have answered the propaganda to the satisfaction of everyone in this room.
The Chinese delegation later told CNA that it was unsatisfied with the defense secretary's reply.
首先，他实际上没有认真回答这个问题，他说我是敷衍的，他说我们是宣传口号，难道说， 难道说那个马来西亚的总理安瓦尔，人家给他提的问题是敷衍的吗？人家是一种宣传吗？人家是要求他去跟中国要去对话，是吧？
The heated exchange comes as China's Defense Minister Dong Jun was absent from this year's security summit. The lower-level delegation from the military's National Defense University instead led by its Vice President, Rear Admiral Hu Gangfeng. Unlike previous years, there was no plenary session held by the Chinese defense minister this time round. These sessions typically reserved for those at the minister level and above. Instead, this time, the head of the Chinese delegation spoke at a smaller session on maritime security. What was also different was the lack of press briefings by the Chinese delegation compared to last year. Those in the past had been called by the Chinese to rebut criticism of it and to lay out the Chinese position on security issues. The Chinese delegation has said that this was a normal working arrangement, which will not affect it from expressing its views on security issues. Speaking at another session, Singapore's Defence Minister Chan Chun Sing said that it was incumbent on other countries to reach out to China to build bridges to avoid misinterpreting each other's position. Olivia Siong, CNA, Singapore.
Isang strategic na lugar ang Balagbag Island para sa Pilipinas, lalo na sa usaping pangdepensa at seguridad dahil ito ay matatagpuan sa pinakatibugang bahagi ng Palawan. Malapit ito sa West Philippine Sea at Balagbag Strait. Kaya naman dito plano ng pamahalaan na magtayo ng Philippine Naval at Air Base para bantayan ang ating teritoryo.
Balagbag ay strategic para sa Pilipinas dahil ang isang channel na international sea lane sa southwestern Philippines ay dito dumadaan. Ito ang dulo na municipality ng Palawan.
Kahapon pinuntahan ni Department of National Defense Secretary Gibo Teodoro ang Balagbag Island para alamin at pabilisin na ang konstruksyon ng itinatayong paliparan sa isla.
Nag-usap din kami ni General Cordura na kung papaano namin mapapabilis yung airport. Masyadong matumal yung trabaho, no? Mabuti na lang nadalaw natin, matutukan na natin ito ngayon.
Pero sabi ng kalihim, maliit ito para sa isang naval base. Kaya naman makikipag-usap muli sila sa iba pang ahensya ng pamahalaan para humanap ng mas malaking lugar. Gayunman, sa halip na naval base, mas angkop-anya ang lugar para sa Coast Guard base. Dagdag ni Secretary Teodoro, hindi malayo na maging ang Balagbag ay minamanmanan na rin ng China dahil international sea lane ito at dinaraanan ng kanilang mga barko.
Hindi naman malayo dahil ito yung international sea route, no? Recognized international sea lane ito. So minsan dumadaan talaga dito ang Chinese vessels. At ito, pag hindi nadama or hindi nagkaroon ng presence dito, napakadali na abusuhin ng foreign influence and other inappropriate and illegal activities dito.
Kasabay ng kanyang inspeksyon ay pinangunahan rin ng kalihim ang All-One Bayanihan Community Outreach Program sa isla. Dahil malayo ang Balagbag sa Puerto Princesa, hindi madali ang biyahe kapag mayroong medical emergency. Kaya naman ang pamahalaan sa pangunguna ng Philippine Air Force at volunteers mula sa ibang non-government organizations ay nagsagawa ng medical mission sa lugar.
Nandito rin tayo upang mag-engage sa tao sa Balagbag, no? To show at maipahiwatig sa kanila that the government is, the national government ay pumupunta sa kanila. And dito talaga importante rin ang DND at saka ang AFP dito sa mga frontier na lugar na kailangan madama ng ating mga kababayan na the government is really looking out for their welfare. At the same time, magkakaroon sila ng engagement at sense of responsibility na kailangan pangalagaan din nila itong lugar na ito dahil Pilipinas nga ito.